This week in the beginner's course and in this set of videos, we're going to cover attacking our opponent's back and defending when our opponent has our back. Obviously, like in Jiu-Jitsu, the kind of hierarchy of like the best positions, back's at the top. The best thing about being on the guy's back is that it's really easy for me to attack him, and because all his kind of weapons in terms of his legs and his arms, they all face this way, so if I'm behind him, it's very easy for me to attack him. Or you see in MMA, guys will also throw punches here, which is why it's so easy to get under the chin. There's other attacks, but the king of being on the back is the rear naked choke. You've seen it in human, or even probably watched MMA or Jiu-Jitsu, you've seen it in like your classic movies and action flicks, etc., etc. It's like the number one choke for being on the back, especially in NoGi. It doesn't matter if it's UFC, it's the number one submission in the UFC, it's the number one submission in all the big competitions. In Gi Jiu-Jitsu, there's potential that probably the best choke from the back is actually a bow and arrow, which you'll learn down the line if you do Gi Jiu-Jitsu. But again, it's a very similar idea. It's a choke when we're on our opponent's back, and it's going to be super strong. There's a bunch of ways to attack the back, sometimes from turtle, sometimes from a bunch of other back takes. The one we looked at, if you want an easy one to go to, if you watch the last video from the last set of videos, which was our mount attacks, if we did one where our opponent turned on his side and we did what was called the chair sit back take. So we're going to watch that if you want a reference for how to get to the back. And today we're going to talk about being on the back. We're going to try and kind of reverse engineer it. So we'll look at our choke first and our finishes to the choke. Then we'll look at how to essentially get the guy's chin open. So often the guy will have his chin really connected to make it difficult for us to get underneath. And then we'll talk about the hand fighting from there. So we'll kind of go in like reverse order, or we're just going to go through the choke first, and I'll just talk about the mechanics. We do this in the class so that you get the most time working on the chokes and working on your mechanics, and then we build backwards from there. Kind of makes the most sense for this kind of submission. So for now, everyone can just be sitting like this. I'll just be behind my opponent, and I'll just talk about the straight up mechanics of finishing a rear naked choke. So the first thing, there's a couple of variations for rear naked chokes. We're going to go for our regular one, so where we come super flush. There's ones like short chokes and stuff like that, where it's more like pressure just right on the kind of windpipe here. We're going to go for the classic choke, which would put the guy unconscious. We're just putting pressure on both the kind of arteries here. My goal here when I start is I want to come super flush. So I shoot this arm as if it's going to come to my own shoulder. Often that leads, depending on your arm and your opponent, your kind of point of your elbow being like right under his chin here. So I want to come super flush at the start, so I've got really good coverage of his neck, so it feels really tight. If I only shoot to like here, there's going to be a lot of space on this side of Edward's neck that I want to take away. So I'm going to be shooting super deep all the way to my shoulder. From here I slide, my other hand's going to come up and my hand's going to slide around my bicep, and then this hand's going to karate chop behind his head. Often my head will be really tight to his head, especially later on when we do like the full sequence. You'll see that my head will be really tight to his head. So when I do this, I just pull my head away just enough so that my hand can chop behind. And this hand's kind of leaning and going back up to this shoulder, so I come super flush. His chin's kind of right above the point of my elbow. It's pointing down like right in the middle of his kind of center line, down towards his belly button. My hand comes up onto my shoulder. I slide it to my bicep. My hand's super tight, and I hide it back behind his head like this. So you can see both my elbows are kind of pointing in the same direction. In stuff like MMA, we get this question a lot. In MMA, why do they put their hand on top of the guy's head? There's a couple of reasons. One, there's a bit more friction if you have a glove here, and it's a bit harder for him to peel off. But also it's really hard when the guy's super tight here to get a glove, because his hand's forced into like a fist of some shape. It's harder to fit that in between us, while we can make our hand like a nice kind of thin line to get through this space. The reason we don't do this in Jiu-Jitsu, I could do this, but it's easy for him to essentially dismantle this position. If he fights up and grabs my hand, he can pull down, and then that opens up this hand, and then he can pull away, and that gives away the choke. But if I come here, slide to my bicep, chop all the way behind his head, if he tries to dismantle this position, he can't really reach that hand that's behind his head, especially if my head comes in back and nice and tight. If Edward tries to reach it, it's very difficult. If he tries to peel this hand up, even if he gets a grip on this hand, over the top, something like this, even if he pulls down, it's being blocked by my own arm here. So it's very difficult for him to get out of this locked position compared to this. Again, at the end of the day, not to say this wouldn't finish a guy. If you're in a self-defense situation and the guy's panicking, very easy to finish a guy from there. But Jiu-Jitsu, where the guy's going to be more calm to work on his defense, we want to be hiding our hand back behind here. So I come flush, grab my bicep, make the space, and I chop back behind, my head reset. A lot of guys here just try to squeeze as hard as possible. Again, not to say that won't work, but we want to be technical in our finish and also conserve as much of our energy as possible. So from here, I'm going to be trying to bring my elbows together. So like scissoring my elbows together like that. You'll see that also brings my arms more flush against his neck. I'm going to shrug my shoulders forward. And now when I squeeze, by just just putting power and just flexing all my kind of muscles in my arm and my biceps. At the same time I do that, I'm going to go from being this really flush grip to trying to pull the point of my elbow back behind his shoulder. Imagine I was doing like a row. I'm going to pull like that. And that's just going to put a lot of the choking pressure, twisting his neck a wee bit and just putting that pressure back through. If I just do it here, it kind of takes away the pressure, but when I'm fully locked up and I pinch my elbows together, I shrug my shoulders forward, and now as I squeeze, I look to roll this elbow back, it's going to be very tight on my opponent. So one more time, I come super deep to start. I grab my own bicep. If my head's really tight, I make that space and just karate chop, so you can see the back of my hand here slides in, and then I can just hold my hand kind of around my shoulder here. I'll bring my hand in nice and tight again. My head's out in nice and tight again. I'm going to pinch my elbows together, so I'm trying to pinch them together. I shrug my shoulders forward, and now when I do my squeeze, I'm going to look to roll my elbow back like this. A lot of guys make the mistake when they row that they move everything. See him like twisting his head? That's not as tight. Everything stays in the same place, just this elbow's going to pull back. As if I was trying to put this elbow behind his back. See, like that? But everything else should stay in place. If I twist his whole head here, it's not really as tight. See, he's not really tapping. But if everything else stays in place and just my elbow comes back, that's going to feel really uncomfortable. Alright. So now we'll just go into a position where we have some hooks, and I'll talk about when my opponent just tucks his chin. So same position, sit forward now, I'll have hooks like this. So we're gonna, like I said, we're working backwards here. Obviously, if I just try and rear naked choke him right now, in reality, he'd be fighting his hands with my hands and trying to pull down them. We're gonna get to that. We're gonna work this backwards, and we're gonna work to the point where we get all his hands will be out of the way, so we're not gonna have to worry about them. And then all he's gonna be able to do to defend is tuck his chin. Which if I just try, again, if you ever watched that very famous Conor McGregor-Khabib fight, or you see some other stuff, this isn't a legitimate defense in the sense of I come below his nose onto his face. Not only is this very uncomfortable, it might feel like I could break his chin, it's very sore, but also like I can still choke him over the top here. It's kind of just more grim. Again, the difference between this and our flush choke is that when we're flush, it's not, this will put anyone up. When his chin's tucked, this is like how, it's kind of pain related, we can still choke him through it, but if he can kind of take more pain and effort, it's going to be a bit harder. This is just going to be consistent when we're nice and flush. So that's what we look for. So if he's just tucking his chin, which again, we'll get to how we get his hands out of the way so that we're only in a situation where he's tucking his chin, we're going to make this shape with our hand. You can see it like this, where we pull our fingers into our knuckles and we're just flaring our thumb like this. I'll show it in a couple ways. And our goal here is this is kind of like a shovel kind of thing, where we're going to be wedging the point of our thumb up and down to open his chin. Imagine we're like jacking up a car, you know what I mean? So we're here and we're jacking this up to lift this chin slightly, so that then our arm can slide through nice and deep. I don't want to start right under his chin. It's actually very difficult if he has his chin poked to get in there. We're going to start under like where his chin kind of starts. So we're going to go by the side of his head, by his ear. You see, I can insert the point of my thumb in here like this, and then I can wedge as if I'm a jack of a car. I'm not digging it into his neck. I'm not trying to make him uncomfortable. I'm trying to open his chin up like this. So I'm here, I can wedge, wedge, wedge. And when I feel like there's space, I don't wedge all the way to here, because that's slow and he's going to be doing a bunch of other stuff trying to fight. I just wedge enough till I feel like I can punch my arm like an uppercut and come super flush. So again, I'm here, I wedge, I wedge, I wedge. When I feel like there's space, I just shoot super deep, again bringing my hand to my shoulder, and then I'm back to my finishing mechanics. So there's this, he brings down, I can wedge, bring it right under where his ears, the bump of his chin, and I wedge, 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 shoot nice and deep. And I'm kind of being a bit mean and aggressive with it. If I try to be really nice, it's not really going to do anything. There's a couple other ways to lift the guy's chin as well. This one's more effective, the most effective, because your arm is immediately ready to choke. Other ways is I could lift his head, like I'm checking his temperature, and just pull his head up and then shoot underneath. The issue is now I'm in a wee bit of a race. When I pull up here, as soon as I let go, I'm racing to get my arm underneath before he tucks his chin, which sometimes can work, sometimes won't work. So again, this is good for consistency, but sometimes there's other options. If I feel like I can't lift his head, he's being really aggressive, pulling it down, we only do this to people we don't like, or a self-defense situation, I can bring just like where my thumb kind of meets my hand and just get under his nose and lift like that. That one is very uncomfortable. They're pulling him up kind of by his nose and his face. I won't show it again just because I like Edward, but that's something we could do where we could come here, lift. But the same thing on both of those, they might work sometimes, but sometimes they won't work because they're not super consistent, because every time I'm going to be, as soon as I let go, I'm in a race. Yeah, if he's smart and is able to tuck his chin, it's not going to work as well. Again, if I was in a self-defense situation, I would definitely rip on the guy's nose because it's going to be uncomfortable, he's going to panic, it's going to be sore, and he's probably not going to have the right reaction, which is tucking his chin super tight, and then I could come back to my strong choke. But the main one we're going to be looking for is this shoveling motion in terms of our jiu-jitsu training. Come to the edge of the ear, lift, 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 punch deep. Hand to the bicep, hand to the shoulder, elbows pinch, shrug forward, and then I squeeze and roll my arm back through. Alright, so now we're going to talk about actually taking the guy's back. So if you scoot forward just a tiny bit there. So there's two ways I can fall here when I'm on his back. I could fall to, again when I'm here, a couple of just basic ideas for technique. I'm going to have my feet on the inside of his legs. We call these hooks. A good rule of thumb when starting, like anything, all rules are made to be broken, but a good rule to start is we're not going to cross our feet. I'll show in a wee second when we get to one hip what happens. So I'm just going to have my hooks and my feet come in and back heeling with my heels to stay tight. I'm going to have a seatbelt, like a seatbelt to a car. So one of my arms is coming over the shoulder. That'll be the arm I try to do my choking with usually. And one of my arms is coming under his armpit, under the shoulder, like this. Small, detail, which again is less jiu-jitsu related, maybe slightly more self-defense, is I like to hide my choking arm under my top arm. So if he ever gets panics and tries to pull this open and pulls to this top arm, my top arm's good to go. But if it's the other way and now he pulls down on my choking arm, I can't really choke him with this arm. I might be able to if I've got a crazy good squeeze, or if he brings his arm up really high. There's a couple situations, but mostly for my rear naked, I want my top arm to do the choking. And then there's two ways to fall. We're going to talk about attacking from the underhook side, which just means I fall to the hip that I'm under his arm. So that would be falling this way, and then falling to, or attacking the overhook side would be falling onto the hip on the side that I have my arm over the shoulder. Which would be this way. All right. So we're just going to rotate here so that when we fall underhook side, we're like facing, so we shuffle this way one more time. Perfect. I also don't really want to be here sitting. I want to get my opponent to the hip. It's harder. He's going to find it easier to do escapes when he's like sitting up on his butt. And in the same vein, I don't want to be just like flat on my back. With it here, he can kind of drive his head under my chin and push forward, and then this is uncomfortable for me. I ideally always want to be breaking my partner to the hip. When we did our chair sit back take, again, watch the video on the mount attacks, we finished on our underhook side anyway. So this will chain really well with the beginner's course if you're doing it, or if you missed the session or you're watching for some other reason, that'll chain well together when you get used to them. So we would have finished in this position. I'm on my shoulder, I bring my head nice and close to my opponent's head. If I'm really far away like this, it's going to be easy for him to put his back on the mat, which we'll talk about in the next video. Yeah, you can start turning and put your back on the mat. And then that's easier for him to escape. You see, he's starting to get away there. So with my head's, I'm nearly trying to put my ear up to his ears if I was trying to listen to it. I want to be really tight. My chin's on his shoulder. Again, I don't cross my feet here. If he chops my legs, my feet with his legs, like this, and then arches in, like drives forward, yeah, keep going, keep going, keep going, tap. What's happening here is that my own shin of this foot is going to push into my Achilles of my top foot, and his leg is going to start bending my toes like this. You see how that's like bending my foot, and that's going to put on foot lock pressure. So that's why I don't cross my feet here. I just keep them nice and tight. Down the line, you might learn and see stuff like body triangles, which are good for controlling the guy. That's fine from here as well. We usually go for a top side body triangle, but we're just going to not cross our feet. And I want a lot of chest to back position connection. So a lot of the times when you do entries and the back takes. When you start, you'll fall off in ways where like he's like this and you're kind of on his side. If that happens, I just want to get as much of my chest covering as much of his back. Again, the more of his back I'm covering my chest, the least likely he can bring his back to the mat and start escaping. So I'm in this position here. Again, my overall goal here is to shoot this, free my arm, and come into my rear naked choke. But obviously when I get to this position here, he's got his hands free. So I just try and choke him here. Again, if it was self-defense, or like again, this is why you see in MMA, it's easier for guys to give up chokes, because if you're getting punched in the head like 20 times, they'll start to defend, and then it's going to be easier to get under the chin. But for jiu-jitsu, he's going to be usually having his chin innately tucked and fighting with his hands. You know what I mean? So my goal here is to start to get to a position where I trap one of his hands with my legs, and I force the other one away. So that now all he can do is tuck his chin, and we know how to get past that. And then we're in a strong position to go for our finish. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk through here. This is called the straight jacket system. You can also look this up. So we're here like this. First thing we're going to do is we want to start to establish a cross grip with our bottom hand. So our bottom hand, which is our left hand in this case, is going to grab his right hand. That frees our right hand up, which is our choking hand, to start attacking him. So say he wasn't doing anything, he was really focused with this hand grabbing my hand, I could just start to open and start to attack the choke. But if the guy's done a bit of jiu-jitsu or he's got a bit of awareness, he'll realize that if I start attacking this choking hand, yeah, he wants to grab this hand. You know what I mean? So even though he's grabbing my hand, I have some amount of indirect control. If I start to push my hand this way, you know, it's kind of coming with me. Again, I can't really choke him with it because he'll be pulling down, but I have some amount of control. So I'm starting, I get my cross grip, and I'm controlling around the wrist, or around like the bit of his hand where his thumb kind of meets his hand, like this. I'm going to start to threaten my choke. He'll probably defend this by pulling down. Makes sense. I'm going to push this hand towards my leg as I lift this hand up. Now, I want to trap this hand with my leg on the top. A lot of guys, when they start, will just try and bring their foot in like this. The issue with this, if I have you off for a second, is that when I try to bring my foot in like this, it's about how much can I like bring my knee in. Do this like interior rotation. So that becomes a bit of a stretch. Like I've done a lot of jiu-jitsu and I'm kind of flexible, so like that works well for me. It's not as difficult for me as it might be for other people. But if you're just started or you're just not that flexible, trying to like essentially do like this kind of stretch, which is what you're trying to make your body do there, can be hard. So I don't want to be just trying to force my leg into this position. So again, I'm here, I get my cross grip, I go for my chokey defense. I don't want to just be trying to catch over the top by bending my knee in. See, that's difficult. Instead, I'm going to bring my leg up to his shoulder, and then I can bring my foot onto his wrist, and now I'm doing like a leg press motion, which is going to be much easier and also stronger. I can press, and I keep pressing until his hand gets trapped behind. I bring my leg here, and I'm going to tuck my foot behind his butt. Can't really see from here, but I'm going to be like actively hiding my foot nice and tight behind his butt. So if ever tries to free his hand here, it's going to be very difficult. So I'll show that one more time. I've got long legs as well, so re-grip my hand. Perfect. So when I get here, it's easy for me to bring my leg up and over here. If it's a bit more difficult, I can put my foot on the hip and push him down, push myself up a bit, and then it's easier to see to get my leg over. So that's just going to depend on you and your partner's body type, sizes, that kind of stuff. Again, if you've got long legs, this is a bit easier compared to if you've got shorter legs, but you can always step on the hip and push him away and push ourselves up. My leg comes up. See that? I'm nearly bringing like the crook of my knee over his shoulder. And then that's really easy to step on the wrist, peel, push, and hide my foot behind. If he tries to free his arm here, it should be difficult. And my knee should be really pinching against him. See if I open my knee really wide, yeah, he's gonna like limp his arm out and escape. So when I get over here and I pull down, so that this knee is gonna clamp in against his body. So if ever tries to free, it's really difficult. Now from here, he's probably still attacking my choking hand, so I want to choke him, it's going to be difficult. I'm just bringing my hand back through this space. So I don't want to bring it over the top, it comes through this space. And I'm just going to bring my fingers like in, like against his like palm here. I'm going to pop it open as if I was like lifting, like revving a motorbike or something. And at the same time, I'm going to pull my wrist the other way. I'm free. As soon as I do that, I want to stiff this arm so that this arm locks out my bottom arm. So if he tries to bring this hand back to his chin, it should be difficult. Again, if I feel like this grip isn't that great, I can just grab around his wrist. Try to bring this hand to your chest. Try to bring this hand to your chest. So now all we can do is tuck his chin, and we're back to our wedge, 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 come through here. When we get here, you might want to lift slightly so you can pull this arm out. Hand to bicep, shoulder, elbows pinch, shrug forward, and pull that back for my finish. One more time here, guys. So again, I'm here, I don't have my feet crossed, I have my head nice and tight here. I get my cross grip again. In reality, this might take a wee bit of fighting. If he's moving his hands around a wee bit here, I might be threatening my choke moving, but I eventually want to get a cross grip. So my left hand or my bottom hand is grabbing his top arm, the elbow that's pointing to the ceiling. I grab around the wrist and then I start to threaten the choke. He'll defend this, makes sense. I'm gonna push this arm down, stiffening and straightening my arm as I lift this other one up. Then again, I don't want to try and bend over here. I bring my leg nice and high over the shoulder, so it's like a leg press. If I need to, I step and push him lower. But you can see I've got nice long legs, so it's definitely easier for me. And I step my heel right in his wrist, and I peel. And then when I get this, I bring my foot behind his back. So I don't leave my foot here, my foot tucks behind his back, so like the flat of my foot's against his butt. And I make sure my knee is pinched in nice and tight. Again, if my knee's open, he's gonna like limp his arm and come through. So when I'm here, I pinch in nice and tight. Now he's just got control of this. I want this arm to choke him. If I just try and choke him now, it doesn't work. So I'm coming back through, bringing my fingers in against his palm here, and I'm gonna pull that as if I'm like popping it towards me as I pull my wrist the other way. So just opposing forces. I'm pulling his hand towards me as I pull my own hand away. As soon as I get this, if I start choking here, he'll just bring this hand back and grab me again. So as soon as I free this, I push this hand towards his legs and I stiff my arm out. If my arm's bent, now I have to use a lot of force. Like bring your hand back. I'm having to like use a lot of like energy and muscle to push away. But if I lock my arm out, so it goes stiff, now it's like the frame into my shoulder. I'm gonna feel stronger here and it's not gonna really use a lot of energy. Try and bring your hand back. I'm not really using any energy here, but my elbow bent and now he pushes back. Now I'm really having to push and I'm gonna get tired as well. So lock this arm out. Now all I'm doing is just back here. I'm wedging, find the ear, wedge, wedge. When I get in, shoot nice and hard. Reset your head if you need to. Lift, bicep, karate chop to your shoulder. Bring your head back in nice and tight. My elbows pinch together. I shrug my shoulders forward and then I pull this elbow behind as I squeeze for a strong finish. Again, there's a couple other attacks you can do from the back. There's triangles and arm bars, and if you add in a gi, there's stuff like bow and arrow chokes and cross chokes. But the rear naked choke is, especially in NoGi, gonna be the king, not only probably the best submission in the king position, but definitely off the back. Again, the back is the best position for us to be on attacking, so therefore it's the worst position for us to be on when our opponent's attacking us. But there's still a lot of ways we can escape, ways we can try to defend ourselves and slowly escape back down this kind of, if you imagine it's like a hierarchy of positions, but back is the best one. Our escapes are going to try and escape back to mount, and then we know mount escapes, so then we can escape to our half guard or our closed guard, and then we can start to attack ourselves. So in the next video or next week, we'll be covering our back escapes from both the underhook side, so the side we were just on, and also a situation where maybe our opponent pulls us to the other side, which is the overhook side, which we didn't really cover much in this video because there's only so much time to show you everything, but it's personal preference. Both sides have their pros and cons, and different people like different sides for different reasons. And over the course of your training, you'll probably learn attacks and positions and control from both. So thank you very much, and thank you, Edward.